I've never played a Remedy game before, but I have a general idea of what to expect. A competent third-person shooter, accompanied with great writing, and a little less than conventional storytelling. So I went in expecting something that was simply above average, but instead got one hell of a roller coaster ride. I was bored to death at first and couldn't stand playing the game, but eventually I found it to be a fascinating experience. This was quite the surprise hit for me, and anyone who's looking for something a little experimental should give this a shot. But it's gonna come with some pretty big concessions to keep in mind. The story follows Jessie Faden, who has her own personal reasons to search for a secret government agency known as the Federal Bureau of Control, which secures impossible objects that disobey the laws of reality. It's basically a straight-up ripoff of the SCP Foundation website, even going so far as to imitate their form of documentation and heavy use of redacted text. While movies like Cabin in the Woods and Annihilation certainly took some inspiration from the X-Files style of government cover-up, Control is by far the most blatant and direct use of the concept. That's not a detriment against Control at all. As I've said in the past, I'm perfectly fine with ripoffs as long as it's done well. But more on that later. Jessie easily finds her way inside the Bureau, only to find it under invasion by a mysterious alien force known only as the Hiss. Through a series of what appear to be odd coincidences, Jessie is also made to be the Bureau's new director after she finds the deceased body of the previous one. The new job grants Jessie a powerful alien gun that's able to change its shape and role and has infinite ammunition, as well as several superpowers such as telekinesis and limited flight. Jessie's goal is now to obtain the answer she has been searching for, while dealing with the Hiss invasion and ultimately saving the world. Storytelling is a major part of Control, with a ton of text to read, dialogue to listen to, and cutscenes to watch, using both in-game graphics and live film. For those who enjoy the quirky nature of SCP's horror stories, in which the agency is sometimes portrayed as being run by incompetent scientists, then Control certainly has you covered. A lot of the documentation and dialogue portray the staff as basically being office workers, joking around, complaining about their jobs and bosses, and sharing workplace gossip. Even in the face of some world-ending disaster, characters treat such an event as another day on the job. This is also reflected in the environments, which are almost entirely office workspaces. However, the level design is solid and allows for interesting battles and navigation, especially once you unlock flight. It's just such a burn that combat takes so long to get to that point. Control is very well written. It can be humorous, tense, and frightening at any given time. However, it always manages to stay within an established tone. This isn't some stupid anime with tonal shifts where it's difficult to take the story seriously. Control actually has good writing and fun characters to interact with, along with environments to explore and a ton of lore to go through. One of my favorite moments was an explanation for a real-life Cuban embassy incident that was all over the news around August 2016.
Alright, take this down. The situation in Cuba has been evaluated by the relevant authorities. The mysterious illness affecting the staff at the U.S. Embassy in Havana was caused by sonic weaponry in the hands of a foreign power. Numerous personnel have damage to the inner ear, but most are expected to make a full recovery. Of course, the event also damaged their cellular walls, but we can't blame that on some stupid noise gun. Thank God no local doctors examined them first. Honestly, what are the odds that an alternate would show up inside a U.S. embassy? Talk about good luck, huh? So much easier to... Are you still recording this?
However, I do feel as though the game went a little too far to the extreme here. There is so much story to get through that it's overwhelming, especially in the opening hours. The gameplay sits on the bench for too long, being little else than just walking around while the narrative takes center stage. Even once the game's combat begins, the player is only given a basic pistol to work with, while the more creative tools don't get introduced until much later. It is an interesting world, but it wasn't doing a whole lot to engage me. Part of it is a flood of text documents throughout the game, which is all completely optional and, considering how dry most of it is, probably not the worst idea to skip. There are a few golden nuggets here and there, but you won't be missing too much. Another thing is that Jesse often has quips of internal monologue, and this got on my nerves pretty quickly. Half the time it's okay, and sometimes it's used creatively. But the other half of the time it's obnoxious and makes dialogue between characters feel stilted for no good reason.
I'm gonna tell her why I'm here. I'll risk it.
Listen, the Bureau was involved in an incident in my hometown, Ordinary, 17 years ago. The Bureau came in and covered the whole thing up. I've been looking for this place for a long time.
That's enough. Maybe that's too much already. I can't tell her about Dylan and the rest yet.
I've seen mentions of an Altered World event case dealing with Ordinary. You were at Ground Zero as a...
Aside from the rather overbearing storytelling, the presentation as a whole is extremely well done. All of the areas have a dark and somber tone, one that evokes mystery and a feeling of how small you are in the greater world. This is amplified by the very subdued soundtrack that pulsates lightly in the background and sends chills down your spine. Not to mention the constant presence of hovering bodies that are chanting some strange incantation. One moment in particular, known as the Ashtray Maze, throws the whole thing for a loop. But, like I said earlier, it does so without overriding the previously established tone. Remedy really managed to nail the look, feel, and sound of this world. Once you get past that initial hump, particularly once you start unlocking some superpowers and the combat opens up more, then the game starts progressing at a nicer pace, and it becomes easier to invest yourself in the story. The gameplay is almost incredible, but it's not quite all there. I know I'm beating a dead horse here, but it's an important point to bring up. The early gameplay is an extremely basic third-person shooter with just a pistol to work with and generic gun-toting bad guys. Eventually, the player starts to unlock more guns, including a shotgun, machine gun, sniper rifle, and rocket launcher. Each gun can be slightly customized with add-ons such as higher accuracy or faster reload speed. There isn't really a whole lot to the customization aspect, but it stays unintrusive enough, so I guess I'll take it as is. Unfortunately, the decent variety and firepower is gimped a little bit by the fact that the player can only hold 2 guns at once. The menu can be entered at any time, but I found it a little slow and awkward. On top of that, the sniper rifle turned out to be insanely powerful for the beefier enemies, while either the shotgun or the machine gun were great in a secondary role. So there isn't too much of a need to hold additional guns anyway. It would have been nice, but the guns feel too imbalanced in my opinion. But the true draw of Control's combat are the superpowers, which are slowly granted to the player one at a time. These range from powerful telekinetic throws, a wall of rubble to act as a shield, quick bursts of speed, limited flight, and seizing control of weakened enemies to join you as allies. Most of these draw from a shared energy pool that needs time without use in order to recharge, and this balances out extremely well with using psychic powers while the gun reloads, and then going back to firearms while your energy recharges. This allows for very fast-paced and hectic battles, while also allowing a lot of freedom to the player that most shooter games don't grant. While it's not uncommon to throw back grenades in a lot of games, it is more unique and really satisfying to catch a flying rocket in mid-air. Complementing the player's options are the opposition of enemies. Aside from the typical cannon fodder and beefier opponents, there are also trickier ones that stay invisible before sneaking up on the player, as well as a teleporting sphere that plays a support role and constantly heals its allies as long as it's alive. The idea behind the gameplay designs are all there, but the big problem here is that the AI are all idiots. It's not too uncommon to have enemies run directly at the player and not do anything, and their overall accuracy is pretty pathetic too. As long as the player keeps a cool head and consistently guns down enemies, then everything should go over pretty well. That's not to say that the game isn't difficult, however most deaths will typically come from getting snuck up on, or the enemy subtly learning how to aim their gun and nailing you down uncharacteristically quickly. It's a pretty annoying quirk of this game that mars an otherwise extremely solid experience. The player has wonderful tools at their disposal, but the targets to use them on are lacking. The boss fights will no doubt be a real sticking point for some players due to how drastically different it can be in comparison to the rest of the game. There are the basic bosses, which are just stronger normal enemies, while the real creative ones are the typical video game style giants. And they all have their own unique rules to dance around, as well as weaknesses to focus on. In the case of Former, its attacks destroy the floor, which causes holes to fall through and instantly die. This creates a bit of multitasking, such as taking out the projectiles before they become a problem, and grouping the melee attacks around a specific area. There's a lot of pushing and pulling between using the shield, aiming your gun, repositioning, and so on. And the boss is designed to take your focus away from the floor, which makes the battle that much more dangerous. It's extremely difficult to juggle all these mechanics at once, especially when the game hasn't trained you for this stuff. But personally, I loved it. The bosses are one of the few legitimately challenging portions of the game. Maybe falling through the floor shouldn't have been a one-shot kill, but you just gotta get good. By the same token, figuring out the boss's weak spots can easily turn it into a chump. I'm sure most players will find the plant monster to be nearly impossible initially, only to have it go down in a couple of minutes once you figure out what you're supposed to do. It's a shame to see what Control is and what it could have become. Improve the enemy AI, have more creative guns and balance them out better, pace the game more smoothly. If any one of these were implemented, this could have been an 8 out of 10. If it had all of these, I think we're easily looking at a 9 out of 10. But as it is, this game has way too many flaws to overlook. I love Control a lot, and I highly recommend it to anyone interested since it's such a creative third-person shooter. However, it's missing too much polish to really stand tall with the competition. If Remedy can take this concept and develop it further, then I think there's serious potential for a sequel. Thanks for watching my review on Control.